The maternity ward is quiet at 2 a.m. when Marcus reaches into Elena's hospital bag for her phone charger and his fingers close around an envelope instead. Then another. Then a stack, bound with the same red ribbon he used 16 years ago. His own handwriting. His own words. Love letters he wrote to a woman who died before Elena ever entered his life. He stares at his newborn son in the bassinet across the room. How did they get here? Before we begin, tell us in the comments which city you're watching from. And if you're new to the channel, subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next story. The night Marcus's son was born was supposed to be the best night of his life. And for a few hours, it was. He had held Elena's hand through 12 hours of labor. He had cried, actually cried, when the doctor placed the baby on Elena's chest. He had taken too many photos, texted his sister, paced the hallway, and come back to find Elena already counting the baby's fingers like she needed to be sure they were all there. By midnight, Elena was asleep. The room had gone quiet. The kind of quiet that only exists in hospitals at night, soft machines, low lights, the distant sound of someone's shoes on a hallway floor. Marcus sat in the chair beside the bed, too awake to sleep and too tired to think. He needed his phone charger. He remembered packing it in the front pocket of Elena's hospital bag, the gray one she had prepared 6 weeks ago with color-coded labels and a printed checklist. He unzipped the pocket. His hand touched something that wasn't a charger. It was paper. Cold and stiff in the way that paper gets when it's been kept somewhere sealed for a long time. He pulled it out slowly, the way you pull something out when part of you already knows you don't want to see it. An envelope. His name on the front. His own handwriting. He stared at it for a full 3 seconds before reaching back in. There was another one. And another. He pulled them all out, one by one, until he was holding a bundle of 12 envelopes tied together with a red ribbon, the same red ribbon, the same faded color, the kind you buy from a craft store and never see anymore. He knew exactly what they were before he opened a single one. He had written these letters when he was 26 years old, during the 18 months he spent falling completely in love with a woman named Diane. He had never sent them. He had kept them in a locked box in his home office because throwing them away had always felt like too final a thing to do. Diane had been dead for 14 years. Marcus sat very still. He looked at Elena sleeping in the hospital bed 3 feet away. She was on her side, one hand open near her face, the way she always slept. She looked the way she always looked, peaceful, familiar, completely herself. In 6 years of marriage, he had never once mentioned Diane's name to her. Not once. He had told himself it was because there was nothing to tell. Diane was gone. The love was gone. Keeping that chapter of his life private wasn't a lie, it was just a door he had never opened because there was no reason to. He was starting to wonder if he had been wrong about that. He counted the envelopes. 12. The complete set, in the right order, exactly as he had left them. Nothing missing. Nothing added. Just his letters, in his ribbon, in his wife's hospital bag, on the night his son was born. A small sound from across the room pulled him up before he could think. The baby. Marcus set the letters on the chair and crossed to the bassinet. His son was awake, barely, just eyes blinking at the ceiling with the unfocused look of someone new to the idea of having eyes. Marcus picked him up without thinking, the way he had already learned to in the past 4 hours, and stood with him in the low light. He looked at his son's face. Then he looked at the letters on the chair. The weight of both things at the same time was almost too much. He was still standing there when the door opened. A nurse came in for a vitals check, calm, routine, soft-footed. She moved toward Elena's monitors. Marcus turned slightly away, and in one motion that surprised even himself, he slid the letters inside his jacket with his free hand. The nurse finished her check, made a note, and smiled at the baby. "He's beautiful," she said quietly. "Thank you," Marcus said. His voice came out completely normal. He was proud of that and ashamed of it at the same time. She left. The door clicked shut. Marcus waited a moment, then transferred the baby carefully back to the bassinet. He stood over his son for another few seconds, tiny chest rising and falling, completely unaware that anything in the world was wrong. Then Marcus picked up the letters. He turned the bundle over in his hands. 12 envelopes, red ribbon, his handwriting on each one. He had already asked himself how they got here. He didn't have an answer. He asked himself if Elena had found them, if she had put them there, if this was some kind of confrontation she had planned and then, what? Fallen asleep before it happened? He didn't know. What he did know was that he couldn't ask her tonight. She had just given birth. She was exhausted. Their son was 3 hours old. Whatever this was, whatever conversation was coming, it would have to wait. He would say nothing. He would act like everything was fine. He had gotten very good at that. He turned to the last envelope to put the bundle back together, and stopped. The last envelope had already been opened. The flap was loose, the seal broken cleanly, as if someone had taken their time with it. He slid the letter out halfway, just enough to confirm it was still there, still his words, still the same page he had written in his 20s. Then he checked the others. All 12 had been opened. Someone had sat down with every single letter he had ever written to Diane and read each one, word by word, all the way through. He looked at Elena sleeping. He looked at his son. He looked at the letters in his hand. And he had no idea which direction the danger was coming from. If this story is already pulling at something in you, you're not alone. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when the next chapter drops. This one is only just beginning. Marcus didn't sleep. He sat in the hospital chair with the letters tucked back inside Elena's bag, under the folded blanket, beneath the spare clothes, exactly where he'd found them, and he watched his wife breathe and his son sleep, and he tried to figure out how his past had found its way into this room. He kept coming back to one thing. The box had been locked 3 weeks ago. He was sure of it. They had been packing for the hospital on a Sunday afternoon, going through the checklist Elena had printed and laminated like the practical, prepared person she was. He had gone to his office for his laptop charger and noticed the box on the shelf the way you notice something you've trained yourself not to think about, a quick glance, a small pull in the chest, and then nothing. He had not touched it. He never touched it. But someone had. His mind went back to Diane the way it hadn't in years. She was 27 when they met. Brilliant in a way that felt slightly dangerous, the kind of person who made you feel like you were thinking slower than everyone else in the room, and somehow made you enjoy the feeling. She laughed too loud. She changed her mind constantly and never apologized for it. She had strong opinions about things Marcus had never thought to have opinions about, and within 3 months of knowing her he was completely gone. He wrote her letters because she traveled for work and phone calls never felt like enough. He never sent them. He would finish one, read it back, decide it said too much, and file it away. 18 months of letters he was too afraid to send to a woman he was too afraid to lose. And then he lost her anyway. He didn't let himself go further than that. Not tonight. The details of how Diane left his life were something he had spent years learning not to revisit in quiet moments, and this moment was already carrying enough weight. 2 years after Diane, he met Elena. He remembered their first conversation clearly, a work event, a bad appetizer, Elena making a dry comment under her breath to no one in particular that Marcus happened to catch. He had laughed before he could stop himself. She had looked at him like she hadn't expected anyone to hear her. 6 months later they were together. A year after that, engaged. He had never mentioned Diane. Not once. He had told himself it was the right choice. Diane was gone. She was a chapter that had ended in pain, and there was no version of that story that helped Elena, no version that didn't just put a shadow in the room that didn't need to be there. He wasn't hiding something shameful. He was protecting something tender. That was what he had told himself. Sitting in a hospital chair at 4 a.m. with 12 opened letters hidden under a folded blanket, he was no longer sure that explanation was as clean as he'd always believed. He thought about who knew. Rachel, his younger sister, she had been there for the worst of it, the months after Diane, the part Marcus didn't talk about. She knew everything. Owen, his former business partner, he had known Diane professionally and Marcus personally, and he was the kind of man who noticed things and filed them away. He knew enough. His mother had known. But his mother had been gone for 4 years now, and whatever she knew had gone with her. That was the list. 3 people. 14 years of silence, and 3 people who knew the name Diane. Marcus looked at the time on his phone. 4:47 a.m. He stood up quietly, checked that Elena and the baby were still sleeping, and walked out. The hospital parking garage was empty and cold and too bright in the way that parking garages always are at that hour, fluorescent lights that don't know what time it is. Marcus stood between 2 cars and called Rachel. She picked up on the 3rd ring, her voice already alert in the way it gets when she knows something is wrong. Marcus? It's 5 in the morning. I know. He kept his voice low and flat. I need to ask you something and I need you to answer me straight. A pause. Okay. Did you ever tell Elena anything about Diane? The silence that followed was 1 second too long. He felt it in his stomach before she even spoke. No, Rachel said. Of course not. Why would I, Marcus, what's going on? Nothing, he said. Don't worry about it. He hung up before she could ask anything else. 1 second too long. That was all it took. Rachel had always been a fast talker, a quick reassurer. She didn't pause before saying no, she never had. That pause was something. He didn't know what yet. But it was something. When he got back to the room, Elena was awake. She was sitting up in the bed, the baby against her chest, the room lit by just the small light above the headboard. She looked tired in the deep, physical way of someone who had just done something enormous with her body. She also looked completely at peace. "Hey," she said softly. "Where did you go? Needed some air." He sat down beside her, close enough that his arm touched hers. "Sorry." She didn't question it. She just shifted slightly so he could see the baby's face. "He was fussing a little," she said. "He's okay now." Marcus looked at his son. Small face, eyes closed again, one hand curled near his chin. "He's okay," Marcus agreed. Elena leaned her head against Marcus's shoulder the way she had done for 6 years, automatically, like it was just the thing her body did when he was near. He let her. He sat with his wife and his newborn son in the quiet of a hospital room, and he looked like a man at peace with the world. Then he reached into his pocket and opened his phone. He had installed a security camera app on the system at home 6 months ago after a neighbor's car was broken into. He rarely used it. He opened it now, navigated to the home office feed, and found the still image from the last motion trigger. The shelf. His desk. His books. And the locked box, sitting open on the shelf, lid raised, interior visible, completely empty. Marcus stared at the screen. The letters were in this room. But whoever had taken them hadn't just borrowed them for the night. They had been inside his home. Inside his office. Inside a locked box. And they had put everything back perfectly, except for one thing. They had forgotten to close the lid. If you felt that silence from Rachel the way Marcus did, you already know this story is deeper than it looks. Share your theory in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss what's inside that box, and who left it open. They came home on a Tuesday. The hospital had felt like its own world, controlled, quiet, someone always checking something. Home felt louder, even in the silence. More real. More exposed. Elena carried the baby through the front door, and Marcus watched her move through the house the way she always did, touching things lightly, straightening a pillow, pausing to look at the afternoon light coming through the kitchen window. She looked tired in the way that new mothers look tired, fully, honestly, without apology. She looked happy too. The kind of happy that has weight to it. She didn't look like someone hiding anything. Marcus was starting to understand that this might be the most frightening possibility of all. He waited until that evening, until Elena was asleep with the baby in the bedroom and the house had gone quiet, before he went to his office. The box was exactly where it always was. High shelf, left side, behind a stack of architecture books no one ever opened. He lifted it down with both hands and set it on the desk. No scratches on the lock. No marks on the frame. The metal clasp was clean and unforced, sitting the way it always sat when the box was properly closed. Marcus knew what that meant before he finished thinking it. Whoever had opened this box didn't break in. They either had a key, or they knew the combination. He set the box down slowly and stood there. The combination was a 4-digit number he had chosen 15 years ago and never written down anywhere. Not in his phone, not in a notebook, not in a password manager. He had kept it in his head because there was only one person he had ever shared it with, his mother. She used to keep a spare key to the box in case anything happened to him. When she died 4 years ago, Marcus had changed nothing. He didn't think there was any reason to. He stood in his quiet office and asked himself, who else could have known? He lifted the lid. The box was empty now, the letters were still in Elena's hospital bag, which he had quietly moved to his desk drawer at the hospital before they were discharged. He wasn't ready to put them back yet. He wasn't sure he would ever put them back. He ran his thumb along the interior edge of the lid, slow and careful, the way you check something when you don't know what you're looking for. He found it near the top corner, a faint smudge. A single partial fingerprint pressed into the inner surface of the lid, the kind left by someone who had touched the box and then tried not to. Just one. The rest of the interior was clean. Marcus stared at it. One smudge. That was all. Whoever this was, they had been careful. Careful enough that they almost got away with it. Careful enough that one small mistake was all that remained. That kind of careful doesn't happen by accident. That kind of careful means someone thought about this before they did it. He started making a list in his head, because he couldn't write it down anywhere. Who had been in this office in the past year with enough time and privacy to do this? Rachel, his sister, who came for dinner every few weeks and sometimes used his office to take work calls when the kitchen got too loud. She knew the house well. She had been here alone before. Owen, his former business partner, who had stopped by in the spring to drop off some documents. Marcus had left him in the office for 20 minutes while he dealt with a contractor at the back of the house. And Daniel, Elena's younger brother, who had house sat for 3 weeks in September while Marcus and Elena were in Italy. 3 weeks. Alone in the house. With access to every room. 3 people. All of them trusted. All of them capable. Marcus hated that the list existed. He took the letters out of his desk drawer and laid them on the surface in order, the way he had numbered them years ago. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. He just needed to look at something, to feel like he was doing something, because standing still in that room was getting harder by the minute. He went through them slowly, checking each envelope, each fold, each edge. 11 of them felt the same. Slightly soft, slightly aged, the paper carrying that particular dryness of something stored in a sealed space for over a decade. The 12th one stopped him. It was the 7th letter in the sequence. The longest one he had ever written, 6 pages, the one he had reread the most in the year after Diane died and then never touched again. The paper was different. Not dramatically, not in a way that would register to someone who hadn't held this specific letter before. But he had held it before. Many times. The paper was crisper. Stiffer. The fold lines were sharper than they should have been after 16 years. Someone had unfolded it completely and refolded it, recently, carefully, but not carefully enough to undo the physics of fresh creases in old paper. Someone had read this letter more recently than the others. This one specifically. The longest one. The one that said the most. Marcus held it under the desk lamp. He turned it over. And on the back, written in pencil so light it was almost invisible against the page, the kind of writing that disappears unless the light hits it exactly right, was a single word. A name. Nora. Not Diane. Not Elena. Not a name he recognized from any part of his life, any year, any conversation. Just that one word, in handwriting that wasn't his, pressed into the back of the most personal letter he had ever written. Someone had been inside his home, inside his office, inside his most private possession, and they had left him a name. Marcus set the letter down. His hands were completely steady. That frightened him more than anything else. Nora. He had no idea who that was. But whoever left that name wanted him to find it. Wanted him to ask the question. Wanted him to follow it somewhere he hadn't been yet. And the thing that kept him standing at that desk long after he should have moved was that it was working. If that name hit you the same way it hit Marcus, you're exactly where this story wants you. Drop your theories in the comments, and subscribe with notifications on so you're here when the next chapter answers the question neither of us can stop asking. The name Nora sat in Marcus's head like a splinter. Small. Invisible to everyone else. Impossible to ignore. He started where anyone starts, he searched. He went through every person he had ever known, every name in his contacts, every face from every job and every neighborhood and every chapter of his life. Nothing. No Nora anywhere near him. So he searched Diane's life instead. He went through what he could find online, old work profiles, archived event pages, a university alumni directory he found buried on a.edu site that hadn't been updated since 2009. He almost closed the tab. Then he found a photo. It was from a university fundraiser. Diane was 22, standing near a table with 2 other women, laughing at something outside the frame. She looked young in a way that made Marcus's chest tighten for exactly 1 second before he moved past it. He looked at the woman standing closest to her. The name tag on her lanyard read, Nora V. Marcus stared at the screen long enough that the display dimmed. Someone from Diane's university years had been inside his home 3 months ago. And they had left their name, in pencil, on the back of the most personal letter he had ever written. This was not a coincidence. This was a message. And whoever sent it had been planning it for a long time. He made 2 decisions before breakfast. The first was that he wasn't going to confront anyone yet. Not Rachel. Not Daniel. Not Owen. Not until he knew more than a name and a photograph. The second was that he needed help. He found the investigator through a referral, a name passed quietly through a friend of a friend who worked in corporate law. He met him in a parking lot outside a hardware store, which felt appropriately uncomfortable. He gave the man one instruction: find a woman named Nora, connected to a woman named Diane, from university records dating back roughly 20 years. He didn't explain why. He didn't offer more than that. The investigator didn't ask. Marcus drove home and walked through his front door smiling, because Elena was awake and the baby was awake, and this was the first morning of his son's life at home, and he was not going to let any of this touch that. He was getting very good at holding 2 completely separate things at the same time. He wasn't sure if that was strength or damage. Daniel came that afternoon. Elena's younger brother arrived the way he always did, loud at the door, immediately holding the baby, immediately making Elena laugh about something. He was easy to be around. He always had been. The kind of person a room relaxes around without noticing. Marcus watched him from across the kitchen. Daniel was warm, present, completely at ease. He held the baby like someone who had been waiting to hold him. He asked Elena how she was feeling, not the polite version of the question, the real one. He stayed for 2 hours, helped with dishes without being asked, and left with a hug that lasted a second longer than usual, the way family hugs do when something real has just happened. Marcus watched all of it and understood nothing. Because Daniel was either exactly who he had always been, or he was the most relaxed person Marcus had ever seen carry a secret. And Marcus couldn't tell which. He couldn't find a single crack. Not one moment where something slipped. That should have reassured him. It didn't. Rachel came an hour after Daniel left. She brought food, the practical, unsentimental kind of gift she always brought, and spent 20 minutes with the baby before Marcus quietly asked if she could come to the office for a second. He needed to grab something. She followed him in. He closed the door. "I'm not asking if you told Elena about Diane," he said. He kept his voice even. Conversational. "I'm asking if you ever told anyone else." He watched Rachel's face do something he had never seen it do before. It didn't fall. It didn't panic. It just stopped. For 1/2 second, everything behind her eyes went very still. "Rachel. It was years ago," she said. "It was nothing." "Who?" She exhaled. "Owen. At that company dinner, the one in December, maybe 6 years ago. I'd had too much wine and we were talking about you and I mentioned that you'd had a serious relationship before Elena. I said her name. That's it. I didn't tell him anything else." Marcus looked at her. "Marcus, I said her name. That's all it was." He nodded. He told her it was fine. He thanked her for telling him. He held the door open and followed her back to the kitchen and watched her pick up the baby again, and he felt the shape of something shifting underneath everything, something he couldn't see clearly yet, but could feel the weight of, the way you feel a current before you see the water moving. Owen knew about Diane. Owen, who had been in his office. Who Marcus had left alone for 20 minutes in the spring. Who had known Diane professionally, years before Marcus did. He hadn't thought about that until now. He was thinking about it now. His phone rang at 9 that evening. The investigator. "Found her," the man said. "Nora Vasquez. 42 years old. Lives about 40 minutes outside the city. She and your Diane were college roommates, first and second year. Stayed close after, from what I can tell." Marcus sat down. "Is she reachable?" "She's reachable. Send me what you have." "Already done." A pause. "I also sent you one more thing. Wasn't part of the ask, but I thought you'd want it." Marcus opened the email on his laptop while the man was still on the line. There was a file attached. A single entry from a visitor log, the kind kept by the private security company that monitored his neighborhood. Date, time, vehicle description. 3 months ago. A Tuesday morning. A car parked outside his address for 41 minutes. The registered owner of the vehicle, Nora Vasquez. Marcus read it twice. "She was at your house," the investigator said unnecessarily. Marcus already knew. What he didn't know, what he couldn't answer, was the part that mattered most. His house. His address. A woman he had never met, connected to a woman who had been dead for 14 years. And someone inside that house had opened the door and let her in. If you already know who opened that door, drop it in the comments, because this story is nowhere near finished. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when the next chapter tells us exactly how deep this goes. Marcus found her on a Thursday morning. Small cafe, corner table, already seated when he arrived. Nora Vasquez was in her early 40s, with steady eyes and the kind of stillness that comes from having already decided what she was going to say before she sat down. She didn't look nervous. She looked like someone who had been waiting for this conversation for a long time and was quietly relieved it had finally arrived. She ordered nothing. She folded her hands on the table. "I wondered when you'd find me," she said. Marcus sat down. "Tell me everything." She did. Diane had been her closest friend, from their first week as college roommates to the last year of Diane's life. She described Diane the way only someone who truly knew a person can, not perfectly, not with reverence, but with the specific, unpolished details that you can't invent. The way Diane organized her books. The way she went quiet when she was actually angry, instead of loud. The way she had talked about Marcus, not constantly, but in the way people talk about the things that matter most to them, carefully, like the words cost something. When Diane died, Nora had taken her belongings. No family had come forward to claim them. She was the one who packed the apartment, closed the accounts, kept the boxes. And inside those boxes, tucked into the back of a desk drawer, she had found photocopies. Marcus's letters. All 12 of them, copied by Diane before she had returned the originals to the locked box she had borrowed them from while staying at Marcus's apartment one weekend. Marcus hadn't known she'd read them. Hadn't known she'd copied them. He sat with that for a moment. Diane had held those words and kept them and never said a thing. He pulled himself back to the table. Why now? He said. Why the hospital bag? Nora's expression didn't change, but something behind it shifted. Because I found out Elena had been looking into Diane. Quietly. On her own. For over a year. She paused. I know people who knew Diane professionally. One of them mentioned that a woman matching Elena's description had been asking questions, old colleagues, people from that period of Diane's life. I put it together. She said it plainly. No drama. No accusation. Elena was jealous of someone she'd never met, Nora said. She was building a picture of who Diane was, what she meant to you, why you never talked about her. And I thought, if she's already looking, she deserves to find something real. She deserved to read those letters and understand who you were before she knew you. Marcus sat back. And the strange, uncomfortable thing was, it made sense. It all made sense. Elena had sensed something unspoken in their marriage and had done what careful, thorough Elena would do. She had investigated quietly, on her own, without confronting him. And Nora had intervened like a protective friend doing what she thought was right. It wasn't clean. It wasn't comfortable. But it was a complete explanation. A real one. He drove home with that explanation sitting in his chest, solid and heavy. Furious at Elena for going behind his back. Guilty about keeping Diane a secret in the first place. Angry at himself for giving Elena a reason to go looking. The emotions weren't simple, but they were at least pointed in directions he understood. By the time he pulled into the driveway, he had decided. They needed to talk. He found Elena in the living room, the baby asleep in the bassinet beside her, a book open in her lap that she wasn't reading. She looked up when he came in. Hey, she said. You okay? I need to tell you something, he said. And I need you to be honest with me after. She closed the book. She gave him her full attention, the way Elena always did when she understood that something real was coming. He told her about Diane. All of it. Not the version he had been carrying in silence for 6 years, the edited, protected version, but the real one. Who Diane was. What she had meant to him. The letters. The locked box. Finding them in the hospital bag. Every step of the past week. Elena listened without interrupting. Her face moved through things he couldn't fully read, but she didn't look away. When he finished, he asked, How long have you been looking into her? Elena's brow pulled together. Looking into who? Diane. Her colleagues, her history. Marcus. She said his name quietly, but firmly. I don't know what you're talking about. Nora told me. I don't know who Nora is. He watched her face. He had spent 6 years watching this face. He knew the difference between Elena caught and Elena confused. He knew the micro-expressions of someone searching for a story versus someone genuinely lost. She was genuinely lost. She said you had been researching Diane. For over a year. I have never heard the name Diane before tonight. Elena held his gaze. Marcus, I didn't know she existed until you just told me. The solid, heavy explanation in his chest began to crack. Nora Vasquez, he said. She said she was Diane's closest friend. She said she put the letters in your bag because. Describe her. He did. Age, appearance, the steady eyes, the corner table, the folded hands. Elena's face went through something he had never seen before. Not fear. Not anger. Something quieter and stranger than both of those. She stood up slowly, the way a person stands when their legs have gone slightly uncertain beneath them. She picked up her phone from the side table. She scrolled back, not searching, she knew exactly where it was, and she turned the screen toward him. A photograph. Taken from inside their house, through the front window. A woman outside on the pavement, half turned away from the camera, caught in the middle of a step. Elena had clearly taken it casually, the kind of photo you take when something feels slightly off and you want a record of it, just in case. I took that 6 months ago, Elena said. She was standing outside for a long time. I assumed she was a neighbor I hadn't met. I forgot about it completely. Marcus looked at the photograph. He recognized the posture. The coat. The way she held herself, even half turned away. It was Nora. Standing outside their home. 6 months ago. Long before Elena's bag was packed. Long before their son was born. Long before any of this, apparently, had begun. Nora had told him Elena was the one doing the watching. But Nora had been outside their house first. Everything Marcus had believed for the past 3 hours dissolved quietly, like something dropped into still water. The answer he had driven home with, the complete, coherent, emotionally satisfying answer, was gone. And in its place was a much colder question. If Elena wasn't the one investigating Diane, then what was Nora actually doing here? That moment when the answer disappears and something worse takes its place, leave your theory in the comments, because this story just changed direction completely. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when we find out what Nora was really looking for. Marcus went back to Nora the next morning. No phone call. No warning. He simply drove to the address the investigator had given him, knocked on the door, and waited. When she opened it and saw his face, she didn't look surprised. She looked like someone who had been expecting the knock and had spent the night deciding what to do when it came. He held up Elena's phone. The photograph on the screen. The date stamp in the corner. 6 months ago, he said. You were standing outside my house 6 months ago. You told me you got involved because Elena was researching Diane. But this was 6 months before any of that. So I need you to tell me what's actually going on. Nora looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then she stepped back and opened the door wider. She sat across from him at her kitchen table, and this time the composure was gone. Not completely, she wasn't falling apart. But the careful, prepared version of Nora from the cafe had been replaced by something smaller and more tired. Someone carrying something she had been carrying for too long. I wasn't acting on my own, she said. Then who? Someone contacted me about 2 years ago. He said he knew Diane. He said he knew about you, about your marriage, about the baby coming. He told me that Elena needed to see those letters, that it would matter for a child. That it would protect someone. Marcus kept his voice level. What was his name? She looked at the table. Owen. The name landed without drama. Quietly. Like a key turning in a lock that Marcus hadn't known was there. Owen. His former business partner. The man Rachel had told about Diane years ago over too much wine at a company dinner. The man Marcus had left alone in his office for 20 minutes in the spring. The man he had known for 15 years and trusted without ever thinking about it because some people you just trust without examining why. He told you to do this, Marcus said. He told me what to do and when to do it. He gave me the photocopies of the letters. He told me which pocket of the bag to use. He said it would all make sense eventually. She finally looked up. I thought I was helping. He made it sound like I was helping. Marcus stood up. He had everything he needed from this room. He drove home, and this time he didn't try to carry it alone. He told Elena everything before he even took his coat off. She listened at the kitchen table while the baby slept in the next room, and this time the dynamic between them was different. The night before, Marcus had been explaining himself, confessing, almost. Now he was bringing her something. Asking her to help him carry it. That was a different conversation entirely, and they both felt the difference. When he finished, Elena said, What do you know about Owen? Professionally, I mean. After your partnership ended. Marcus didn't know enough. That was the problem. When the business partnership had dissolved 7 years ago, amicably, mutually, just two people going different directions, Marcus had let Owen fade into the background the way you let people fade when there's no reason to keep them close and no reason to push them away. He knew Owen consulted. He knew Owen had stayed connected to their shared network. He had never looked deeper than that. He looked deeper now. It took him less than an hour to find what he had never thought to look for. Owen was listed as the executor of Diane's estate. Had been for 14 years. The appointment had been made 6 months before Diane died, when Marcus was still in the relationship, still deeply in love, still the last person who would have thought to ask questions about legal paperwork. Diane had chosen Owen as her executor. Not Marcus. Not her family. Owen. Marcus stared at that fact the way you stare at something that looks wrong but that you can't immediately explain. Diane had known Owen professionally. But she had chosen him to manage everything she left behind. And Marcus, too broken to be involved in anything after her death, had never once asked what being her executor actually meant. What Owen had actually had access to. What Owen had quietly controlled for 14 years while Marcus built a new life and never looked back. Elena put her hand on his arm. Keep going. The estate files were not public. But enough of the professional record was traceable, if you knew where to look and had the motivation to look hard. Marcus spent the afternoon pulling threads, legal filings, medical institution records that had been partially digitized, cross-referenced against the timeline of Diane's final year. He found it buried inside a set of clinic records that Owen had never flagged, never disclosed, never mentioned in 14 years of managing an estate he controlled completely. A private document. A procedure record. Dated 11 months before Diane died. Marcus read it 3 times. Diane had been pregnant. The record didn't use that word, it was clinical, coded, the language of a private facility protecting a patient's privacy. But the meaning was clear when you read it straight. A procedure. A referral. A placement record attached as a secondary document. The placement record was 4 lines long. It noted that the child had been placed successfully. It noted that the family had been vetted and approved. It noted that the biological mother had requested no further contact. And at the bottom of the document, in the field marked emergency contact for placement records, Owen's name. Not Marcus. Not Diane's family. Not a lawyer or a social worker or anyone whose presence made institutional sense. Owen. Who had been Diane's executor. Who had controlled her documents for 14 years. Who had contacted Nora 2 years ago and set everything in motion. Who had given Nora photocopied letters and a specific pocket of a specific bag and a specific night. Marcus sat back and looked at the document on the screen. Diane had been carrying a child when she died. And Owen had known. Had known from the very beginning. Had been the one trusted contact between a dead woman's final decision and a child Marcus had never known existed. He looked at Elena. She was looking back at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before, not shock, not fear. Something more careful than both of those. Something that looked like the beginning of understanding something enormous. The letters, she said quietly. He didn't do this to expose your past. Marcus nodded slowly. Owen had spent 14 years holding a secret that wasn't his to keep forever. And somewhere along the way, he had decided it was time to open the door. The question, the one that was going to change everything, was why now? And who else already knew? Owen's name on that document changes everything we thought we understood. Drop your reaction in the comments, and subscribe with notifications on so you're here when we find out what Owen has been protecting all these years. Marcus called Owen and said 4 words. We need to meet. Owen didn't argue. Didn't ask what it was about. He gave an address, his home, not an office, not a neutral location, and said he'd be there in an hour. That detail stayed with Marcus on the drive over. Owen had chosen his own home. That meant he had already decided how this conversation was going to go. He was ready for it. Owen answered the door looking exactly like a man who had been carrying something for 14 years and had finally gotten tired of the wait. He was calm. Older than Marcus remembered him looking at their last meeting. He stepped aside to let Marcus in without a word. They sat in Owen's living room. No drinks offered. No small talk. I know about the estate, Marcus said. I know about the clinic record. I know you were the emergency contact. Owen nodded. Just once. Like a man confirming something he had always expected to confirm. Before you do anything, Owen said, you need to understand what Diane asked me to do. He stood up, went to a drawer in the desk by the window, and came back with an envelope. Old paper, slightly worn at the edges. He held it out. Marcus took it. It was Diane's handwriting. He recognized it immediately, the particular slant of her letters, the way she pressed slightly harder at the end of each word. He had read enough of her handwriting over 18 months to know it the way you know a person's voice. The letter was dated 3 months before she died. He read it slowly. She had written it clearly, without drama, the way Diane did everything that mattered. She explained that she had made a decision about the child. That she had thought about it for months and arrived at the same place every time. She did not want Marcus to know. Not because she was angry with him, not because she doubted him, but because she knew him. She wrote that Marcus would feel obligated. That he would step in because it was the right thing to do, not because he was ready. She wanted the child to have a father who chose it, not a father who felt he had no choice. She had asked Owen to protect the placement. To manage the records quietly. To make sure the paperwork stayed sealed. And she had asked him to keep it that way, permanently, if necessary. He deserves a real family. So does Marcus. Let them both have that. Marcus set the letter down on the table between them. The room was very quiet. Diane had loved him enough to make a decision she had no right to make for him. She had looked at who he was at 28 and decided he wasn't ready, and she had been trying to protect him, and she had been wrong, and none of that made the love behind it any smaller or any less painful. He sat with all of that for exactly as long as he could afford to. Then, where is the child now? Owen exhaled. 14 years old. Healthy. Stable home, 2 parents, good school, normal life. The family has known from the beginning that he was adopted. He knows too. He paused. Marcus, this child has a life. A real one. Walking in now doesn't just affect you. I know that. Do you? Owen leaned forward slightly. Because what you do next doesn't just open a door. It could blow apart everything this kid has built his understanding of the world around. Marcus looked at him. You don't get to decide that for me. Diane already made that mistake. Owen said nothing. He looked, for the first time, like a man who didn't have a prepared answer. The front door opened. Both of them turned. Elena stood in the doorway, still in her coat, slightly out of breath, not from running, but from the particular breathlessness of someone who has been holding something urgent for the entire drive over. She looked at Marcus. Then at Owen. She held up an envelope. I found this at home, she said. In the bag. A different pocket, one you didn't check the first night. Marcus crossed the room and took it from her. The envelope was smaller than the others. No ribbon. No name on the front. He opened it. Inside was a single photograph. A school portrait, the standard kind, plain background, the subject sitting straight because someone had just told him to. A teenage boy, maybe 13 or 14, dark-haired, with a serious expression that looked like it was trying to decide whether to be a smile. An unremarkable photograph in every external way. The kind that sits in a wallet or on a fridge and disappears into the background of daily life. Marcus turned it over. On the back, in handwriting he now recognized as Nora's. He asked about his father once. Just once. 7 words. Marcus read them twice and felt them the way you feel something that lands directly on a bruise you forgot you had. He turned the photograph back over. He looked at the boy's face again, the serious expression, the dark hair, the careful posture of someone who had learned to be still for the camera. And then his eye moved, the way eyes do when they're searching without knowing what they're looking for. Behind the boy, slightly out of focus, a shelf. Books, a binder, the ordinary clutter of a teenage bedroom photographed by a school photographer who wasn't looking at the background. And a trophy. Small. Partially obscured by the binder in front of it. But the shape was distinctive. Marcus knew that shape. He had held that exact trophy at 14 years old, standing in a school gymnasium while someone took a photograph his mother had kept for years. Regional chess championship. Under 15 division. The same competition. The same trophy design. The same age. Marcus stood completely still. It could be a coincidence. Chess trophies weren't unique. Regional competitions happened all over. A 14-year-old boy with a chess trophy meant nothing by itself. Except that Marcus's hands had stopped working properly. Except that the photograph felt suddenly heavier than a piece of paper had any right to feel. Except that somewhere in the part of him that didn't need evidence to know things, something had already decided. He looked up at Owen. Owen was watching him with an expression that was equal parts guilt and grief, the face of a man who had kept a secret for 14 years and was watching the exact moment it stopped being keepable. Neither of them said a word. They didn't need to. 7 words on the back of a photograph, and a trophy that shouldn't matter but does. Leave what you're feeling in the comments right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the next chapter is the one this whole story has been building toward. Owen made the call on a Wednesday. He wouldn't say what he told James's adoptive family. He wouldn't say what he told James. He only said that there was an opening, 1 hour, a public location near the boys' school, completely optional on James's end, and that James had agreed. Marcus drove the 2 hours alone. He had not told Elena where he was going, which was the first time in 2 weeks he had kept something from her, and it felt different now than silence used to feel. Heavier. More chosen. He told himself he would tell her everything when he got back. He told himself that enough times that he almost believed it was a good reason. He parked outside a small community center and sat in the car for a moment longer than he needed to. Then he went inside. James was already there. He was sitting at a table near the window with a glass of water in front of him that he hadn't touched. 14 years old. Dark-haired. Serious in the way that some kids are serious, not unhappy, not troubled, just someone who had been paying attention to the world longer than most people his age and had drawn his own conclusions from what he saw. He looked up when Marcus came in. He didn't look nervous. He looked like someone who had thought carefully about this moment and had arrived at a decision about how to handle it before Marcus ever walked through the door. Marcus sat down across from him. The cover story was a Family Foundation interview, arts funding, youth programs, exactly the kind of thing Owen had made sound plausible on short notice. Marcus had prepared 2 questions in case he needed them. He forgot both of them the moment he sat down and looked at this boy's face. They talked. Carefully, at first, surface things, the way 2 people talk when they are both aware that the surface is covering something enormous. James was polite. Measured. He answered questions without volunteering anything extra, the way someone answers when they are deciding how much to trust the person in front of them. And then, about 15 minutes in, James set down his water glass and looked at Marcus directly. "You came to my school once," he said. 2 years ago. There was a chess tournament in the side gym. You stood at the back and watched for about 20 minutes. Marcus went completely still. He remembered the day. A charity event, a school partnership his firm had been involved with. He had done the official part, shaken the right hands, given the short speech. And then, walking back to the car, he had passed an open gym door and heard the particular concentrated silence of a chess tournament in progress. He had stopped. He didn't know why. He had watched for a while, leaning against the back wall, before something pulled him back to his afternoon and he left. He had thought about that room afterward, in the vague way you think about a moment that felt right without knowing why. I didn't know it was your school, Marcus said. I know. James paused. I saw you standing there. After you left, I looked up the charity on the program from the event. Your name was listed. Another pause, shorter, more deliberate. I know who you are. The room was very quiet. How long have you known? Marcus asked. About 2 years. I asked my parents when I was 12 if there was anything in my file about my biological family. They told me there was a name. I found the rest on my own. He said it the same way he said everything, directly, without drama, as if facts were just facts and the feelings attached to them were his own business. I didn't contact you. I wanted to see what you would do. Marcus looked at him. The letters. James didn't blink. I found Nora through some of my mom's things. She'd kept a card. I asked Nora about Diane. She told me about the letters. I asked her if she still had copies. He folded his hands on the table. She did. And there it was. Not Owen. Not Nora acting alone. Not some adult conspiracy carefully constructed over years. A 14-year-old boy who had found a name in a file, spent 2 years researching quietly on his own, identified a stranger standing in the back of his school gymnasium, and then built a puzzle, piece by careful piece, designed specifically to see if that stranger would follow it all the way to the end. The hospital bag. The red ribbon. The penciled name on the back of a letter. The photograph in the second envelope. All of it. James had built it. James had placed it. James had watched and waited. Marcus sat across from this boy and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't have a word for. It wasn't quite awe. It wasn't quite grief. It was something that lived between the two, the particular feeling of recognizing yourself in someone else's face and understanding, for the first time, exactly what that recognition costs. Why the night my son was born? Marcus asked. James considered the question. Because I wanted to know what kind of man you were when something real was happening. Not on a regular day. On the hardest kind of day. He looked at the table for a moment, then back up. Anyone can seem good when nothing is at stake. Marcus had no answer for that. He wasn't sure one existed. James reached down and picked up a small backpack from the floor beside his chair. The movement of someone preparing to leave. He was ending the meeting on his own terms. Marcus understood that immediately. Then James looked at him one final time. Do you have a son now? Yes, Marcus said. James nodded. Once. Slow and certain, like someone checking something off a list they had been keeping for a long time. Good, he said. Then you should go home to him. He stood up. And Marcus sat there and watched this 14-year-old boy push in his chair with the quiet self-possession of someone twice his age, and understood, with a clarity that arrived all at once and settled into his bones, that James had never been waiting to be rescued. He had never been waiting to be claimed, or found, or welcomed into something. He had been running an audit. He had looked at a stranger in a gymnasium and asked himself a question he couldn't answer from a distance. So he had built a test. Careful, patient, precise. He had spent 2 years designing a situation that would show him exactly who Marcus was when the pressure was real. And now he had his answer. Whether it was the answer James had been hoping for, Marcus didn't know yet. He wasn't sure James was going to tell him. A 14-year-old who built the entire mystery just to answer one question about a man he'd never met. Drop what that did to you in the comments. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're here when we find out what James decided. Marcus drove the 2 hours home without the radio on. He needed the silence. He needed to sit inside what had just happened without anything softening it. No music, no noise, nothing between him and the full weight of a 14-year-old boy pushing in a chair and walking out of a room like someone who had just completed something important. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he knew 2 things. He was done keeping anything from Elena. And he had no idea what came next. She was awake when he came in. The baby was asleep against her chest, one of his tiny hands curled around the edge of her shirt the way newborns grip things, reflexively, completely, without understanding what they're holding. She looked up at Marcus when he walked in, and whatever she saw in his face made her stay quiet and wait. He sat down next to her. And then he told her everything. Not the version he had been managing, not the careful, edited account he had been feeding out in pieces over the past 2 weeks. The whole thing. Start to finish. Diane. The letters. The locked box. The penciled name. Nora's lie. Owen's secret. The clinic record. The photograph with the chess trophy. And James. He told her about the community center table and the untouched glass of water and a 14-year-old boy who had looked at him with clear, steady eyes and explained, without a single unnecessary word, that he had spent 2 years deciding whether Marcus was worth finding. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting once. When Marcus finished, the room was quiet except for the small sounds of the baby breathing. She didn't say, "I can't believe you kept this from me." She didn't say, "How could Diane do that," or "How could Owen," or any of the things that would have been completely understandable to say. She looked at Marcus for a moment, really looked, the way she had looked at him on the night their son was born, before everything, and she asked one question. "What do you want to do?" Not what was right. Not what was fair. Not what made sense legally or practically or morally. What Marcus wanted. He realized, sitting there, that no one had asked him that yet. Not once in 2 weeks. He had been reacting, investigating, confronting, managing. He had never once stopped and asked himself what he actually wanted. He didn't answer immediately. He let the question sit between them the way honest questions deserve to sit. He called Owen an hour later, while Elena put the baby down. He asked one thing: did James's adoptive family know about Marcus? Had they known this whole time? Owen said yes. They had known for 2 years, since the week James found out and went straight home and told them. They had sat with him through it. They had offered to help him find more information if he wanted it. And then they had told him it was his choice, entirely, what to do next. They had left the decision to a 12-year-old boy. And the boy had taken 2 years to make it. Marcus hung up and stood in his kitchen and let the full shape of it come together for the first time. He had spent 2 weeks thinking he was solving a mystery. Chasing clues. Following a trail that led from a hospital bag through a locked box through a dead woman's estate records to a name on a document he was never supposed to see. But that wasn't what had happened. James had built a road. Carefully, patiently, one piece at a time, starting from a gymnasium doorway where a stranger had stopped for 20 minutes for no clear reason. James had taken that moment and turned it into a question: who is this man, really? And then he had designed a way to find out that required Marcus to do all the hard work himself. The letters were bait. Nora was a messenger. The red ribbon, the hospital bag, the birth night, all of it chosen deliberately. James had wanted to see if Marcus would keep pulling the thread even when it got painful. Even when it put his marriage at risk. Even when it meant confronting people he trusted and reading documents that cost him something real. Anyone can seem decent when nothing is at stake. James had made sure something was at stake. Elena came back into the kitchen. She stood beside Marcus and looked at the baby monitor on the counter, their son's breathing visible as a small green pulse on the screen. She had been thinking too. He could tell by the particular quiet she carried when her mind had been somewhere serious. "He didn't come to take anything," she said. Her voice was low. "Certain. He came to find out if you were worth knowing." Marcus looked at the monitor. The small green pulse. In and out. 2 sons. One 3 weeks old. One 14. Both of them his in ways that the law hadn't caught up with yet, and might never fully account for. He picked up his phone. He typed one message and sent it to Owen to pass along. No legal language. No pressure. No promises about the future or explanations about the past. One sentence: "I looked for you because you mattered. That doesn't change." He set the phone down. Elena leaned her head against his shoulder. He put his arm around her. Neither of them said anything for a while, and the silence this time was completely different from every other silence in the past 2 weeks. It wasn't a silence full of things being hidden. It was just 2 people sitting inside a moment that was too large for words and choosing to stay in it together. His phone buzzed 40 minutes later. "Owen." Marcus picked up. "He read it," Owen said. "And?" A pause. He said, "And I'm reading this exactly as he sent it. I'll think about it. Tell him I'll let him know." Marcus exhaled. It wasn't yes. It wasn't a door swinging open. But it wasn't no either. And from a 14-year-old who had spent 2 years deciding whether to make contact at all, "I'll think about it" was something. It was real. "Okay," Marcus said. "There's one more thing," Owen said. He asked a question. After he sent his answer, he asked one more thing. "What?" Owen read it. 4 words. Simple. The kind of question that had no agenda behind it, no strategy, no test. Just a boy asking something he genuinely wanted to know. What did he name the baby? Marcus stood in his kitchen with the phone against his ear and felt something in his chest that he had no name for, something that lived in the exact space between loss and beginning, between a door that had been closed for 14 years and one that was now, very slowly, sitting an inch open. He had an answer to that question. He just needed to figure out how to give it in a way that left room for whatever James decided to do with it. For words that changed the whole tone of everything. Drop what you felt in the comments right now. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because the final chapter is where this story lands, and you don't want to miss it. Marcus sent the first message on a Tuesday. No preamble. No explanation. Just a link to a chess result from a regional tournament, a 13-year-old who had beaten 3 older opponents in a single afternoon, with one line underneath: "Thought you might find this interesting." He sent it through Owen, who passed it along, and then Marcus put his phone face down on the desk and went back to his life. He did not check for a response that evening. He did not check the next morning. There was no response. He had expected that. He was okay with it. He told himself he was okay with it until it became true. The second message went out 4 weeks later. A short news article about a new chess format being introduced in European junior competitions, nothing urgent, nothing personal. Just something he had read and thought, James might have an opinion about this. Again, nothing back. Marcus noted it and moved on. He was learning something about patience that he should have learned a long time ago, that real patience isn't the absence of wanting. It's wanting something and choosing not to make that want into someone else's problem. He held his newborn son a lot during those 3 months. The baby was growing in the fast, almost alarming way that newborns grow, changing week to week, becoming more present, more aware, beginning to track faces with his eyes like he was filing information away. Marcus would sit with him in the early mornings before the house woke up, just the two of them in the quiet, and he would think about what it meant to be someone's father. Not the legal definition. Not the romantic version. The actual thing. What it required. What it cost. What it gave back. He thought about Diane choosing Owen instead of him. He still felt the sting of that, probably always would. But he had also, slowly, stopped needing her to have been wrong. She had made a decision from love, with the information she had, about a man she knew at 28. That man and the man holding his son in the early morning light were related but not identical. She hadn't known who he would become. Neither had he. The third message was different. He didn't send a link this time. He sent a photograph. His own hands, just his hands, holding his son. The baby's face wasn't in it. Just the small weight of him, the curl of Marcus's fingers supporting his back. He wrote nothing underneath. No caption. No context. He sent it and waited. 4 days later, Owen called. He responded, Owen said. There was something in his voice Marcus hadn't heard before, something careful, almost reverent, like a person reporting something fragile. What did he say? 1 word. A pause. Interesting. Marcus sat down. Owen said it quietly, that's the most he's ever responded to anything from his biological side. Voluntarily. In 2 years. Interesting. 1 word from a 14-year-old who had spent 2 years deciding whether to make contact, who had built an elaborate test just to answer a single question about a man's character. 1 word that, from James, meant something Owen clearly understood and Marcus was beginning to. He asked Owen to arrange a meeting. James set the terms. Coffee shop, public, 45 minutes maximum, no other adults present except Marcus. He named the location, neutral, halfway between his town and the city. He named the time. He said he reserved the right to leave early if he felt like it. Marcus agreed to everything without negotiating a single point. They sat across from each other for the second time, and it was quieter than the first, less charged, less loaded with the specific tension of secrets about to surface. The secrets were already out. What remained was just 2 people trying to figure out what they were to each other. It was slightly awkward. Imperfect in the way that real things are always imperfect. James ordered a hot chocolate and wrapped both hands around the cup. Marcus ordered coffee and let it go cold. They talked about chess for a while. Then about school. James mentioned a history project with the particular flat tone of someone describing something mildly annoying, and Marcus made a comment about it, and James made a comment back, and for about 3 minutes they just talked the way people talk when they are beginning, very carefully, to be comfortable. Then James asked, "How's the baby?" Marcus took out his phone and showed him a recent photograph. His son, 3 months old now, looking directly at the camera with the focused, slightly baffled expression of a person still surprised that there is a world. James looked at the photograph for a long time. Longer than Marcus expected. "He has a lot of people already," James said finally. Marcus looked at him. "So do you." He paused. "That's not the point." James looked up. Something moved across his face, not quite a smile, not quite something else. Just a small shift, the kind that happens when a person hears something that lands exactly where it needed to land. He looked back at the photograph one more time. Then he handed the phone back. They stayed for the full 45 minutes. James did not leave early. The conversation Marcus had with Elena happened on a Sunday evening, 3 months after the hospital, 2 weeks after that coffee shop meeting. The baby was asleep. The house was quiet. They sat at the kitchen table with tea going cold between them, and Marcus said the thing he had been building toward since the night he found 12 letters in a hospital bag. He told her he was sorry. Not for loving Diane, he had stopped apologizing for that internally, and she had never asked him to apologize for it externally. He was sorry for building 6 years of marriage on a foundation that had a wall missing. For deciding, on his own, that she didn't need to know. For confusing protection with control. Elena listened. She didn't absolve him immediately. She sat with it the way a person sits with something real, not dramatizing it, not minimizing it. Letting it be exactly as heavy as it was. "I'm not going anywhere," she said eventually. "But I need you to understand that I'm not accepting it because it doesn't matter. I'm accepting it because you matter. Those are different things." He understood the difference. He intended to keep understanding it for a long time. On a Thursday night, 3 weeks later, Marcus was on the couch. His son was asleep on his chest, warm, heavy, completely trusting in the way that only very small people and very loved people can manage. The house was still. The lamp on the side table made the room feel the color of something safe. His phone lit up on the cushion beside him. Unknown number. Which wasn't unknown anymore. Owen had texted him quietly 2 days ago to let him know that James had asked for a way to reach Marcus directly. That the number was his. That Marcus didn't need to do anything with that information except have it. Marcus looked at the screen. 3 words. Same time next month? He looked at his son's face. Eyes closed, chest rising and falling with the easy rhythm of someone who has no idea that the world is complicated and beautiful and full of things that take years to become what they were always meant to be. Marcus picked up the phone. He typed 1 word. Yes. He set the phone down next to the baby, turned off the lamp, and sat in the dark with both of his sons, one asleep on his chest, one 2 hours away in a house he hadn't yet been invited into. No speeches. No grand moment. Just a door left open, and a man choosing to stay near it. If this story stayed with you, the letters, the test, the 1 word that changed everything, share what it meant to you in the comments. And if you want more stories about the things people carry and the ones they choose to put down, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll be here.